I'm sorry. He's an unserious, superficial, empty-suited lightweight. He's not our equal, not even close. This is Glenn Loury. You have tuned into the Glenn Show. Glenn Show at Substack.com, sponsored by the Manhattan Institute every other week. Conversation with John McWhorter, Columbia University professor. I teach at Brown University and am the John Paulson Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. We are back, John. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm feeling pretty good right now. I'm not sure exactly why. Working hard on the memoir, John. Working hard on the memoir. Enough said. I don't want to talk about it. But we
from the end.
Oh man, we're in. You know that psalm, the valley of the shadow of death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So I don't know. We could talk about this book if you really want to, but I somehow don't think I should.
Why?
It's like, I don't know.
Well, I'll ask you this.
Yeah.
I may have to eat my words because now everything that I say about this sort of thing is recorded. But I don't think I'm going to be doing a memoir. Or if I do, I'm going to do it when I'm 90.
Okay, John is gone. He'll be back. We're going to carry on with this. John's coming back right now.
Yeah. Glenn, I'm going to move. When this happens often, I have to move to a different part of the house. It might be my end. Hold on.
Okay, just carry your computer with you. We'll carry on right here, John. And memoir, I don't really want to talk about it, everybody. This is my time for a soliloquy. I can do a soliloquy while John is moving. I really don't want to talk about it. When I say the valley of the shadow of death, I mean the valley of the shadow of death. So, and I'm not doing it to summarize something. I mean, this is a literary undertaking, John. It's art. It's not a report. I'm not reporting. It's the meaning of life. That's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the essence of things. So why not? I mean, why not? Do you not think you have something profound to say about living? Okay, John is settling in. There's a little instability.
Can you see me? So, Glenn, I'm going to leave and come back.
Yeah, you should leave and come back. He's refreshing right now. It's not a report. That was one point. Self-knowledge. Self-honesty. I mean, even if I wanted to lie to you, I have to be clear with myself about what actually happened so I don't know what I'm lying about. And believe me, self-understanding is an achievement. It's not given. You have to clear away a lot of, obstruction and a lot of delusion and aggrandizement, self-aggrandizement, self-delusion, a lot of lies. Yeah. So one of the motifs in the memoir is the distinction between the cover story and the real story. And everybody has got a cover story. You've got a prettified narrative that you tell yourself about what has actually happened to you, about your failures, about your flaws. You have excuses, rationalizations, and the real story. Wait, John is back. And you know what the real story is. Never a dull moment at the Glenn Show. It's either Glenn and John or it's just Glenn.
I just feel like if I wrote a memoir, every second reader would be thinking of it as Black man writes about what it was like being a post-civil rights Black person. And I don't want people to read my life, and even the people who would love read it would be thinking. So don't you worry about that a little bit?
Yeah, man. I hear what you're saying. You're giving them red meat. You're setting yourself up for a certain kind of uh, you know, cheap takedown. Everybody is going to impute motives to you. You know, I see what you say about that. Yeah, I do worry about that. Are you there? Did you hear what I said? Yeah, we got connection problems with John McWhorter. But I know that I'm being recorded, and I think there's something of value here just in this reflection at this moment. I mean, John makes a good point. He imagines how it's going to be read. He anticipates the reviews that'll be written by the usual suspects. And the carping, that was the word I was looking for, the carping, the kind of little small, look at this little, And in my case, given the what it meant for me to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I mean, the way I was living, the things I was doing, the life I was leading, the double life I was leading, the depths of, you know, depravity. And exposing that, making that public, confessing it. There are some obvious points. The point I like to make makes me look clever is the irony of the fact that if you're writing an account of your own life and you anticipate that the readers are going to form opinions about you based upon what they see, you have an incentive to misrepresent. They have a necessity of being on guard against, as readers, as thoughtful readers, of being on guard against the likelihood of your misrepresentation. And so a very interesting game is being played. This fits right into the template that the economic theorist would naturally adopt, the sender, that's me, the writer, and the receiver, that's you, the reader. Me having private information about my life, I know the actual facts, and even more than the facts, I know the interior thoughts that I held as I experienced those facts. So the sender has private information, and you, the reader, the receiver, is trying in a way to decipher. You see what I present, and then you're trying to infer from that what you're going to actually think about me. So that's a nice game. Two players, asymmetric information, signaling, and reading between the lines. That's that game. And the irony is that if I want, as the sender, to be able to have an impact on what you think about me, that is, to be a credible influencer, then I have to earn that status. In the nature of the case, is not something that could be taken for granted. How does a writer earn the reader's trust when the writer is reporting about himself? I think the only way to do that is by disclosing discrediting information. The writer has to put the funk on it. He's got to put the blood on it, the guts. Uh, it has to somehow shock and revolt the reader. John is back.
I have restarted.
Okay, you've done well. You've done well, and you have afforded me an opportunity to wax philosophical about the game of writing about one's own life. Because what I was going to say to you, John, is, yeah, man, I feel you. When you say, I don't want to set myself up for these small-minded, ideological haters to carp and pick at me, which is what they're going to do. They're not interested in actually a literary experience. They're just looking for ammunition. And, they hate your guts, and now you put your guts on the line.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're just going to write you off. They're just going to say, oh, yeah, they're going to do a Clarence Thomas on you. That's what they're going to do. In other words, Clarence Thomas writes my grandfather's son, his memoir, and Clarence Thomas's life is exemplary. I mean, come on. You could easily make a movie about Clarence Thomas's life. Easily. Mm-hmm. He comes up speaking a different language and the poverty thing on the thing, and he goes through the thing he goes through. And I'm not asking for an evaluation of Clarence Thomas. I'm just saying that's what they're going to do to you, because the reception of Clarence Thomas, I know you've seen Corey Robin's book. Oh, in fact, didn't you extol it in a piece that you...
Yeah.
Anyway, and I don't much like the book, and we could talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it. But I do want to talk about memoir writing, and I want to talk about your concern. And you asked me, don't I feel that same concern? That concern that the response will be, it'll be small and impersonally picky and petty, and and like you said, you give them the ammunition. You write about yourself, and then they can take your own words and use it against you. I think that's true. And I was going on in my monologue to reflect on, how a social analyst might think about the problem, because you're self-reporting. The writer is writing about the writer's own life. And you anticipate an audience, and the audience is taking the text of what you present to them and then drawing a response, making an inference from the text. You control the text. They are going to be the authors of their reaction to the text. And so there's a manipulation issue. I mean, there's what do you put in the text? And what I was saying was, if you want, as a writer, to have credibility with the reader, you have to earn that credibility. If you want to be able to influence what they think about you by what you write, and let's say that's the purpose of writing a memoir, you want to leave a record that the reader of it will come to certain conclusions about you and your time and your life that are favorable from your point of view, then you have to earn the credibility of the reader. And the only way, really, to earn the credibility of the reader is self-discrediting disclosure. You have to say things that are ugly about yourself in order to persuade the reader that you should be taken seriously when you say anything else about yourself. So this is a high wire act, man. This is walking out there where a wrong step and it's all the way down, kind of thing like that.
And I'm not sure how much of this got through because of my technical difficulties, but I hear you completely. And I want to make it clear that for me, it's partly that you're sitting there putting your heart and soul into something, and then there's going to be a kind of person who sits there and hate reads it and, willfully misunderstands, can't see you as anything but this monster. To me, that's about 20% of it, though. It's also somebody who would read it favorably. But the way I'm seeing it is that unless, by some chance I discover the cure for cancer or something within my decades left, the reason somebody would want my memoir was because of my Blackness. It wouldn't be because of anything else about me. And so even a positive reader would be thinking, what was his life like as a post-civil rights Black person? What was his life like as somebody who stumbled into a career as a contrarian commentator, et cetera? I like McWhorter. I want to read about, McWhorter's Blackness, as he straddled the 2 centuries. And I get it. I completely get it. But anybody who read my memoir and got that out of it would have something other than what it has felt like to walk around in my own head, where what my public face is disproportionately about race, and it's a duty, and I'm going to keep doing it because, frankly, there aren't enough of us. We have to do this. We owe Black people this, although so many of them will never understand it. But we're doing this for our people. But, during most of life, I'm just, God knows what else I'm doing. And I don't think anybody would find it very interesting. And they would just have this sense of me as, and you may feel differently, And I would just feel like it was a subtraction and people wouldn't be getting what it was like to be the actual me. Like I'm looking around this study right now. There's a Hirschfeld print of 70s TV over on this wall because I like 70s TV. Now, one of the people he caricatures is Red Fox as Fred Sanford, but most of those people are white. I didn't get it because of Fred Sanford. There was a poster it's from when I went to Paris, and there was a bank that had posters where they were using stills from Tex Avery cartoons, like with Droopy and stuff like that. And so it's this poster in French about banks. I don't think I'd know what these words meant even in English. It's about, interest rates, et cetera. But it's got Droopy from the Tex Avery. So I actually dragged that from Paris about 30 years ago. Over my computer is my favorite Peanuts strip. Peanuts is a very white strip. There are black things in this room, but this room is full of what is me. There's a map of Africa that I drew when I was 9 years old. Okay, that's fine. But then I also have a print of an Angra painting back there. I'm a lot of things, just like all people are a lot of things. I'm not trying to show off how eclectic I am. All people are a lot of things. And if I wrote a memoir, all anybody would want to know was what it was like to write as a Black person and to be contrarian, what it was like to deal with subtle racism rather than overt racism when I was in summer camp when I was 15. It's not enough. And I wouldn't want to do it because,
I think you're selling your readers short. I think your life would be of great interest. And I think many people, and particularly if you, given your mastery of the writing craft and the, interesting style, I think that you bring to your prose, I think it would be, I don't have a dog in this fight. You can write or not write. I'm not trying to persuade you of anything, but I do think that if you were to produce such a work, it would be of lasting value and it would be appreciated. Yes, you would be seen as a Black man. I mean, that's not insignificant to who you actually are. I mean, given that you said you talk about my people, you say what we do is important. You're defending the idea of doing it. And I want to come back to that later because I had this interesting conversation with Shelby Steele and Robert Woodson and Kmele Foster that I want to talk to you about. But yeah, this typical reader that you envision who might be drawn to your book and who will be drawn to mine will come with this curiosity driven through the filter of seeing you in that particular role as a controversial African-American intellectual and not seeing your, I like that tour. I like that tour of your interior there in your office or whatever it is. I
carried the laptop around. Yeah.
I'm not at all surprised to learn that you're a cosmopolitan individual of a kind of sophisticated, refined sensibility. I know that's not what you were trying to say. I know you weren't bragging. You were just saying this is you. And I agree. I mean, I feel that way all the time, man, because if I may, just for a moment, I've lectured at the London School of Economics. I've lectured at the Delhi School of Economics. I've lectured in Korea and, in Ghana and South Africa. And, if I say it, it'll sound so self-aggrandizement, but I'm a lot more than a Black conservative writing at Substack and disagreeing with Michael Eric Dyson or some of these dudes.
Yes.
Way, way, way more. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why, and I know you share this with me, I take umbrage at the lionization of lightweight, empty-suited, empty-headed motherfuckers like Ibram X. Kendi. Who couldn't carry my book bag. Who hasn't read, I'm sorry. He hasn't read a fucking thing. If you ask him what Nietzsche said, he would have no idea. I'm sorry. He's an unserious, superficial, empty-suited lightweight. He's not our equal, not even close. Fuck.
I'm sorry. I can't join you.
You made me do it, John. You made me do it.
Oh, God. Oh, I will say this. Glenn, it's going to happen to you and it would happen to me. We would write a memoir. You're going to write a memoir. And you're going to go to something called a bookstore if it still exists. And you know where they're going to put it? They're going to put it in African American issues. Black studies. As if that's all that you are. I've seen some of my books put in the Black section that weren't even about race, just because my name is mine. And that's the way it would be. And even, on websites, Black books. And that's where they're going to put you. And that's where they would put me, as if that sums up our entire existence. And maybe I'm making too much of that.
I think you are. I'm feeling liberated, man. I mean, that little rant that I just went on, I apologize to those who were offended by my dismissive reaction of the great Ibram X. Kendi. I apologize. I did not mean to offend you. I got carried away. But
I really like where we are, Glenn, actually.
I feel like we're going to win, John. I think we're going to win. I think history is on our side, really. I mean, I think this is such a bad equilibrium. That's how economists think, okay? We're in a box here, socially, intellectually, in terms of the political public reflection, the large conversation about the issue that we care about so deeply, which is race. But it's not only race. I mean, we're, kind of free speech, intellectual integrity, honesty in the public discourse and stuff like that. And don't patronize. I mean, you and I both have the same thing. I mean, don't patronize me. This is what you're saying right now. Don't put me in the Black book section when I'm not just a Black book. Don't patronize me. I mean, I think we're going to win that argument. They're so far off. I mean, again, empty suits get paraded around as if they're real, it's called paper mache. It's the emperor who has no clothes.
I agree.
And we could go down the list of things. This affirmative action case, this is going to come to a head now because the court is going to hear oral argument, I think, on Monday, just a couple of days from now. And then there's going to be a decision handed down at the end of the term in May or June next year. This is fundamental. I mean, you could remember how the Bakke case and and all of that, and then the challenges to affirmative action that came up to the Supreme Court in the early aughts. It's like we're going to finally work this out. The court is very conservative, and they're going to do something very significant in terms of the jurisprudential foundation of racial discrimination by public agents and interpretation of civil rights of 1964, which may extend to private. Anyway, it's coming to a head. There's an election coming. I don't know if you want to talk about the election. I'm not a prognosticator, but it seemed pretty obvious that the wind is blowing at the Republicans' back, and there's going to be a kind of sweeping thing. The Biden administration, the whole that 2020 election, and now the aftermath of that, and it's so partisan, it's so intense. And I know we disagree about a lot of the politics, but I'm just saying I think we are winning in terms of the intellectual arguments that we're having over the race question, and I feel optimistic about it.
I agree. I think you have to sometimes know what era you're in. And, people talk about, well, the golden age of television was the 50s. No, the golden age of television is right now. We're living through it. In terms of television having a 200-year history, this is it. In the same way, you look back and you notice that the golden age of classic Black conservatism was the 90s. I doubt if any of you were thinking about that then, but if you look back and you see that it kind of hit the skids around 2003 with the affirmative action decision then, which unfortunately was right around when I was starting. I noticed all of a sudden in 2003, all anybody wanted to talk about was whether hip hop is good or bad. The reason that was the big thing until Katrina and Obama is because there was nothing left to talk about. And so now this is the golden age of Black, quote unquote, heterodoxy. And I think it started partly because of technology, such as what we're using right now, partly because of chance confluence of people, such as finally there being a kid who does this. Coleman is part of it. Finally, somebody who's, in their 20s who adopts this line and isn't afraid. And so you can't say that it's just a bunch of, older people. And then also It's the racial reckoning in early 2020 where so much foolishness was being put forth that there was something that we needed to push back against. And I think that it's at the point, based on everything that you just said, I think that there is definitely the emperor has no clothes out there. I can see that looking at how things were 3 years ago versus how things are now. And I think that the only issue at this point is not whether or not a critical mass of people understand where we're coming from, but whether they have the bravery to act on it. I think we still have to wait to see a little bit more of the Spartacus. That's the issue. It's clear what people think. It's just whether they're going to act on it, whether academia specifically is just lost. But then thinking about the rest of the world, most of the world is not academia. But yeah, there's been a major pushback. We've been part of it. I do not feel like we're losing. I don't think we have a small coterie of fanatics behind us. I think that we're hitting a middle ground. Yeah, I feel good about that at this point.
Well, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, who gave you the Philip Merrill Award for outstanding contributions to liberal arts education recently, is not a lightweight paper mache organization. We were at the gala. You saw that the ballroom was full of people. I was with the conference all day long. It was a very distinguished ensemble, and it's very well funded and well staffed. And there is a very enthusiastic, private, philanthropic, foundational support for it, concerned about free speech and open inquiry and viewpoint diversity in higher education. Now, you can call them conservative if you want to, but they're not about conservatism. They're about the fight for the integrity of the higher educational institutions and about empowering alumni and trustees to be able to effectively advocate for open discourse and don't cancel speakers and don't let the inmates run the asylum leadership in American higher education. That's real solid on the ground pushback.
Yep.
So, my bluffing metaphor, I say they're bluffing when, I don't want to draw you into conflictual territory, but the crime on the city, the failure of the justice reform reaction against the overshooting of mass incarceration. I wrote a whole book about the mass incarceration thing. They overshot. There was way too many people in prison. It was way too punitive. It was way too mean and whatnot. And maybe in some aspects still is. But this reaction against and the justice DAs and the suspension of, the retreat from how did New York become a livable city? Giuliani had something to do with that. Bratton and Kelly had something to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Really? You go from 2,400 murders a year to 400 murders a year.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're pushing back against that. Now the thing has swung the other way. And the consequences are thousands and tens of thousands of bodies, man.
Mm-hmm.
So not letting people speak on a campus, that could not possibly be an equilibrium. That's a bluff. That's a excessive embrace of a kind of relativism and a kind of, as you have pointed out, power that, power, who has it and how did it, the inequalities of power has to be everything. I don't think it holds. I think you can't have it. Otherwise, it's everything goes down the drain. I mean, you lose the very fiber. I mean, you can't keep these Asian kids with high scores out of the elite colleges based on the test is biased or we have to have equity. I mean, I don't think it holds. I think the family, the social disorganization and whatnot. I mean, I stopped because I don't want to dig too big of a hole for myself, but I think the whole thing is a house of cards. I think the biased narrative, progressive structural racism, white guilt thing, I think it'll be blown away. And I think the only question is whether or not it goes away in a kind of reactionary, neo-fascistic, excessive stomping out with state legislatures passing laws that really they oughtn't to pass about telling teachers what they can teach in schools, and with anti stuff getting really, really ugly, and the kind of tacit restraint. No one will say the N-word. No one will say the N-word. But Black crime is certainly something you could imagine one day actually being talked about.
Yeah.
So I think the only question is whether it goes like that or whether there's a kind of more soft landing kind of retreat. But I think
it's going to be, it's going to be both. I think of the Manhattan Institute, which I worked for the better part of 10 years and proudly.
And with which I am proudly associated.
And the last year of it for me was 2010, for those out there who for some reason are still saying he works for the Manhattan Institute. But I did. And they were great years in many ways, but turning intellect into influence, it happens slowly. And you make me think, Glenn, about ACTA. And I'm not into, tooting my own trumpet. Yes, I was the awardee, but what was interesting, and thank you, ACTA, but sincerely, thank you, ACTA, because it's very rare that anybody gives me a prize of any kind. It was very flattering. But the thing is, you think about the room, the white wine, the room, the milling around, and you and I are there. That's a different room from where you and I usually were about 20 years ago. And so I imagine that same event, the same wine, the same kind of building, and I'm there in my 30s. And there are many people in that room who are, just like at ACTA, centrist, sensible people who just understand what excess is, who can tell the difference between liberalism and radicalism when it comes to race. And this is people of various races. 20 years ago, the room that I was most welcome in was one where there were some people like that. But then, without a doubt, I'm not even going to pretend, there's some people milling around who are, obsessed with getting the Clintons and, are proto-election fraud obsessives. Not bad human beings, but that's what they do. There are some people there who just want to talk to you at great length about what a serious problem Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton are. They're mad about that. There'll be somebody who takes you into the corner and says that Black people would be better off no longer giving their kids fancy, flowery, African-sounding names. If those names get discriminated against in employment, then how come you give those people the names at all? The point being, yes. I'm in a room with people where basically it's a room full of card-carrying conservative Republicans. Many of the people in that room's views are not ones that I share, and I can make it politely clear. But that is the room where, because there's an overlap, kind of a Venn diagram between my interests and theirs, that's the room that I'm most welcome in, and I'm giving the Riston lecture. I did that once. That's good. But there's a difference between that room, where somebody like you or somebody like me has to think the overlap is only partial, and then ACTA, where you're really dealing with a very different crowd. Many of those people who maybe 20 years ago, if they knew who you are, thought of you as a rock-ribbed conservative right-wing Republican. I remember being in those rooms where people were genuflecting. There's an amen chord in the air whenever Ronald Reagan's name comes up. And you make do. I liked prisoner reentry reform. I was interested in that. I was interested in making schools better for Black kids. And the Manhattan Institute was really interested in that. But you had to deal with a little bit of static. Much less.
A walk down memory lane. You are getting to a point, are you not, John?
I am, actually. I've been doing this for over 20 years, so I have memories and the world has changed. But yeah, in the ACTA room, you're thinking, wow, this is mainstream. Conservative, yeah. But there are very few people in this room where I would starkly disagree with some basic tenet of theirs. And then, of course, yes, some people are thinking the New York Times. 20 years ago, the New York Times has never shunned me completely. I've had editorials in it now and then. They have reviewed, I think, 6 of my books. I have reviewed about 6 books for them. I've never been shunned by the New York Times, but let's face it. The chance of me writing regularly for them in 2005 or even 2010 would have been slim. Things have changed. I really like the way things are going. So yeah, things are different.
Well, I think you mentioned ACTA. I mentioned ACTA. This is the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, where John was honored, where there was a gala where we recently attended in Washington, D.C. Well, I also attended the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. This is a completely different kind of organization. Classical liberal. They're trying to bring free market type ideas and classical liberal ideas, and a worshipful respect for the founding of the country and the Enlightenment, and it's John Locke and Adam Smith and Federalist Papers and and whatnot, and they want library and preserving these books and ideas and seeing the kids are taught these things and whatnot. And I was honored there as Professor of the Year. They had some kind of long and short of it was not about me being Black, and it was not about touching culture war bases. It was about ideas and whatnot. And I think this free speech stuff and it was core curriculum. I mean, Roosevelt Montaz was one of the other persons offering tribute on your behalf, as was Steven Pinker, and due appreciation of your significant intellectual contributions as a linguist. So there was a kind of high-mindedness,
and it wasn't political partisanship.
Maybe certain people, to remain on names whose initials are MM, wouldn't have appreciated as much.
No, he wouldn't have, but we're not going to say who that is.
No,
and so, yeah. The person, we can say it. It's Myron Magnet, but the audience isn't going to completely understand why we mentioned him, but oh well. Yeah. But yeah, all sorts of things. Or now people are going to think I'm trying to compete with you. I'm not. It's just that I'm showing how much things have changed. I'm with Penn lately.
The writers thing?
Yeah. And I'm on a committee right now where I am, I'm reading, various books that I would not ordinarily read in preparation to nominate for a prize. And I have to keep it quiet, but there's a committee. It's me and two other people. And the two other people are people I look up to massively. They are just some mainstream writers for top publications. They are just people. So it's not that I was balkanized into reading Black novels or something like that. It's not that some conservative organization wanted me to read things from Regnery Press. It's just mainstream. I'm just, one of the gang. That would not have happened 10 years ago, that I would have been thought of for something like that. It's fun. But there's a change in the air. The idea that you and I are these reprobate right-wing assholes is now held by an ever smaller crowd of mostly recreational haters. And that means that we're making a difference. And I'm glad. I like it because it's hard work, as you know.
Okay, I want to turn into a kind of self-reflective examination, you and I, because we're talking about how things have changed for us and, and how we're received. This started out with the memoir kind of back and forth, and now we're on to this. And I wanted to mention the conversation I had with Shelby Steele, Robert Woodson, and Kmele Foster. We had a kind of debate moderated by Rahan Salam at the Manhattan Institute, which will be a future episode of The Glenn Show in due course, on the question, the ethics of racial identification. And the reason I'm raising this now is you think of yourself as a Black man, and not only as a Black man, not simply as a Black man. You hate, in fact, being seen only or mainly as a Black man when looked upon by others, since you are not only and mainly a Black man, but you are a Black man. These are your people. You do care.
And it is part of your sense of self. Yeah,
it's a part of your identity. It's your narrative. It's in a sense, your story. And you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. You'd be doing something for sure, but it wouldn't be quite this if it weren't for the fact that you are a Black American and so on. And that was the question on the table. Kmele Foster, as you know, is a race abolitionist. He's a young entrepreneur and podcaster. The Fifth Column podcast, which is a Substack, is one of his vehicles.
Oh, that's a Substack too? Boy, yeah. They vacuum it up, don't they? Yeah.
Well, yeah, Substack is to be reckoned with, and I'm glad to be with them. It's a wonderful platform, and more power to them. And we'll talk about that on another occasion when I am interviewed by Hamish McKenzie, who is one of the co-founders of the Substack platform. And
listen to me as if I wasn't writing for them, and also my linguistics podcast is on Substack. I'm not dissing, but I'm amazed at their stretch. Yeah.
Anyway, so we had this conversation in which that was a question. The question was whether or not to think of oneself as a Black intellectual to use the phraseology like "my people" in reference to African Americans, quote unquote identify as a Black person was an ethically defensible stand. And Kmele is of the view that it is not, that it is to fall prey to an illusion. It's a kind of essentialism. It makes something of race when race is not a thing of which there is rightly anything to be made. He worships at the shrine of Barbara and Karen Fields and their book, Racecraft, which in a word likens belief in race to belief in witches. There are no witches. Witchcraft is clearly a fanciful thing. Likewise, there are no races. And racecraft, which is the occupation of a person like you and me, if indeed we are the Black guys at bloggingheads.tv or whatever, we're Black, we're very self-consciously Black. It's the occupation of a guy like Robert Woodson, who runs the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise until it becomes renamed the Woodson Center. But it is a center for neighborhood enterprise, and those neighborhoods are most often Black, and the vehicles of the enterprise are most often racially self-conscious entities, churches or social organizations of one kind, or the charter school advocates or homeschoolers or whatever. There's a religion and a racial dimension to it, so whatever. And Shelby Steele, who was the fourth participant in this conversation, who has, as you know, the content of our character, this classic book of his from 1990, and much work that has followed, is a very passionate and eloquent exponent of the view that the race talk of our politics is a shell game, and it's a power move, and it's there's some dishonesty, there's a fundamental corruption to it. I remember that essay of his from Harper's back in like 1987 or something. I'm Black, you're white, who's innocent? This was and maybe it was earlier than that, but this was where the content of our character kind of gets.
Is that the backstory of content of our character? I must admit, I did not know that.
He had a couple of cover story type essays in Harper's, and the first of them starts off with him at a cocktail party. It's perfect John McWhorter. It's very McWhorter-esque, or maybe McWhorter is very Steele-esque in this respect. He said, I'm at a cocktail party, somebody comes up to me, and this is their conversation, and then this thing ensues, and I'm the Black guy, and he wants me to know that he's not a racist, and he's trying to, and there's this psychological thing that goes on between us, and I'm trying to sip my drink, and look at how his bow tie is fitting him, and it was very clever and very powerful, and the idea was that white people don't want to be thought of as racist, and Black people want to be thought of as competent, and we have struck this dishonest bargain in which the Black person bestows upon the white person a dispensation of exoneration, and the white person agrees not to ask whether or not the Black person can actually perform. Agrees to, do a Ibram X. Kendi, and that's the bargain, and it's a corrupt bargain, says Steele. Of course, he's elaborated this into a much broader kind of, I think, practical social philosophy position in that film he made with his son, What Killed Michael Brown, I think is kind of a culmination of that, really. But, he's definitely got his finger on something. So he's against race. I'm going on too long about this. I'm sorry. You're very patient. Thank you.
I'm taking this in.
He and Kmele are kind of against race, and me and Woodson are kind of for race, but now not for race in the sense in which the race card players are for race, the ones that, the Al Sharptons of the world, may rest in happiness because he's not dead. I don't wish him ill. That was a slip of the tongue. May he live long and prosper. That's what I wanted to say about Al Sharpton. But he's a race hustler. I think that's really pretty clear.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Oh, God. Okay, let's not do that. And what am I saying? Bob Woodson and I were defending the necessity and legitimacy of grounding one's sense of self and partly shaping one's life's work in terms of I'm a Black man, I'm a Black identity, I identify. And Shelby and Kmele were arguing against that. Reihan Salam, the president of the Manhattan Institute, thank you for your time, Reihan, moderated this debate. So people, please stay tuned because this is going to be interesting. But that's what, and I kind of want to put that question to you, John, because is there a contradiction? On the one hand, you don't want to be thought of as a Black. You don't want them to have to go to the Black section of the bookstore to find your book or to entertain these asinine kind of cocktail party conversations where people are kind of, oh, I have a chance to talk to this Black guy about this stuff, whatever. You don't want that. On the other hand, you want to define your life's work in part in terms of saving the intellectual integrity and the social health of your people.
I completely get this business of getting past race, but I don't see how it can happen now. And that sounds so cliched. Hold on, go slow. But there is too deep a sense of difference among most Black people. There is too deep a sense of difference among most white people. There is a such thing as Black culture, which is part of most Black people, and it is not synonymous by any means with less educated white culture. There is also educated Black culture, but there's a such thing as Black culture. Black people have different norms of attention and interest in many ways than other people, just like Chinese people, just like Latino people. And these are fluid categories, but the idea that because a category is fluid, it isn't worth talking about is a rather modern illusion, and it's kind of fake in itself. To say we shouldn't think about race at all when we have not only those perceptions, but those often profound cultural differences strikes me at this point as antithetical to getting most American human beings to understand what we're talking about. I think we can get past race once we get past certain other things. And so I have to speak carefully. I will get past race, for example, when I do not see certain Black people allowed to bring less than their white equivalents would have to a discussion, where whites allow them to get away with what is more semaphore than reasoning because they are Black, for example. Once that stops happening and white people can get past seeing us as so different and frankly as so much lower, I would be more inclined to get past race. Once there are probably more hybrid people for whom racial identity simply cannot be as cut and dried as many people would like it to be because they're both things. Call that, I'm going to sound like Sandra Day O'Connor on affirmative action. Call it another generation, maybe, where there's so very many. But at this point, I can't see that argument that we're all just Homo sapiens getting much traction. There are too many people, and I do hate to say that in this case, I'm thinking mostly of brown people, who would be so offended by that idea because all they can hear in it, I'm sorry, folks, but all they can hear in it is someone liking whiteness better. And you just run across that tripwire, and once a certain person thinks that, they'll never hear you again. I can't risk that now. And so I get where Kmele is coming from. I respect it completely. He's probably right in the long term. But here in 2022, we cannot have a constructive race debate yet in stressing that. And that's hard. I need to grapple with this more. But yeah, we do need to get past race, but we can't do it now, not with the way most people think. It's hard.
I think you're probably wrong.
I hope, in a way.
It was kind of your position that I was defending with Bob Woodson in that debate. I mean, I was saying short run, long run. I was saying in the long run, just like European ethnic identity differences faded with intermarriage and assimilation through the course of the 20th century, so that being Irish or Italian Catholic or Jewish didn't mean the same kind of modular distinction and differentiation in 2000 as it meant in 1900. Likewise, in 2100, Blackness will not have the same kind of siloed, one-drop rule, insulated, distinct identity. The lines will get blurred. I think that's the long run. I agree about that. But I think it's going to come quicker than you might imagine. That's where I perhaps would take issue. You say it's locked in and people, you can't see them getting out. And I agree, but they're going to die. I mean, okay, they're going to die in 25 or 30 or 50 years, not in 100 years. But the margins, for example, what did we do with these Nigerian immigrants? All over the Ivy League. I don't know, a big chunk. You cited the statistic, didn't you, of the so-called Black students at the most elite universities are of either West African or Caribbean, second generation immigrant.
But they tend to take on Black American ideology, though. And I don't mean extremely, but they don't feel like their parents.
So the identity, what is Blackness? So that it's kind of, it's in flux and it's kind of unstable. I mean, Obama is not a descendant of slaves. I mean, he's Black. I mean, so Blackness, the meaning of Blackness, it's kind of getting, I was going to say hollowed out, but that's putting it too strongly. I don't mean to say that it is evaporating, but I mean to say that it's flexible and its boundaries. And intermarriage, I mean, so-called mixed race kids. I got kids. There was this one kid in one of my lecture courses who I saw recently. My students love me. They want to take me to dinner and everything, even though we're not in the class anymore, because they just want to stay in contact with Professor Loury, which is wonderful because I love them and I want to stay in contact with them. And, he's a light brown skinned kid or a dark light skinned kid or what? Got the hell. And he told me he was a person of color. And I didn't, I've been with him for a whole year and I didn't know that he was a person of color.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know. I thought he might be a swarthy, forgive me. So, forgive
swarthy.
me. White person, I mean, and it just exposes how, Thomas Chatterton Williams has got to be right. Doesn't everybody have to read Self-Portrait in Black and White? Doesn't everybody have to read the book and think about the deep, subtle kind of exposure of the relativity of it all? Because this is all a kind of socially achieved, agreed upon set of categories that I think are under a lot of pressure. The other thing I'd say is there are more Latino, Latinx, Hispanic people than there are Blacks. By far. I mean, it's like, 18-20% of the population or something like that. I mean, compared to Blacks, like 12% of the population. Depending on where you are in the country, it's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
They are a part of this People of Color coalition too. In a way, it's like these race mongers are hoist on their own petard. They invent a set of arguments about non-whiteness. This is basically about non-whiteness. And then they look up and the non-white Asians are tearing the doors off the hinges at the most elite academic establishments. And the non-white Hispanics are beating you to the ballot box and having a greater degree of political sway. They act, now the Asians don't act in the name of disadvantage and exclusion. They do not. But this identitarian sensibility that's been created based upon, what do you do with the Voting Rights Act when you get away from Mississippi circa 1958 and you get to America in 2023? So here I'll just put the African American case is exceptional, both in terms of its anchor at the core of American national identity, the Civil War, and in terms of the socioeconomic political dynamic that has produced today's exclusion and marginality. That's a product of slavery and of Jim Crow and of migration and of all these things and of racism and reactions. The Afro-American case is unique. Blacks are not white, but a lot of not white people are not Black.
Mm-hmm.
If you design your institutions of law and politics and culture around the moral imperative of the African-American case, but then apply it to everybody who's not white, you've made a huge, monumental historical error.
Yes. We have reached a point where the real issue is that there is a Black American ideology cherished especially by journalists and academics and artists, where for Black people and Black people alone, there's always a certain shoe that hasn't dropped. There's a beef. It's fundamental to the identity that there's a beef. And while that beef is going on, we can't be expected to be subjected to truly serious competition. And everything that we do has to be seen through a different lens than you would see it with pretty much anybody else. That's the bargain. Talk about Shelby Steele. And yeah, I think it's fraying. And there's a canary in the coal mine that we have never talked about, and we should probably revisit it. Something is wrong. That to an extent, the seams are really beginning to show in terms of the portrait of Blackness as this tragedy. Just to be, of this color means that you're laboring under this burden. And if you don't understand it, it means that you're too dumb to see it. But then again, look at these people who are pretending to be Black. If it were really as bad as everybody says, there'd be no such thing as this Rachel Dolezal, who's this white woman who walks around truly having fashioned her sense of identity. She really identifies as Black, including creating oppression, creating episodes of racism so that she can, walk around complaining about things that happened to her. And then my favorite example, I almost wish somebody would do a movie about her. Jessica Krug. She didn't get quite as much publicity as Rachel Dolezal. Jessica Krug was outed a few years ago. She's a white Jewish girl who grew up in Kansas City, upper middle class to affluent, Krug, who decided after she graduated from college to fashion herself first as some vaguely African Black person, Algerian, so that skin color can make some sort of sense. And then she decides she's an Afro-Latina. And, she's wearing big earrings and loud clothes and pretending that she grew up in the Bronx to a drug-addicted prostitute mother. And there's a video of her at some political rally in the Bronx using a New Yorican accent and pretending that, she grew up among her brothers and sisters in the Bronx. And this person was a professor at either Georgetown or American University. I haven't had enough coffee, but she was a tenured professor, wrote serious award-winning books, one in particular. And finally, some of her colleagues began to sense that she was not this Afro-Latina person because the whole story doesn't make any sense. She claimed that at immigration, in some way, they misinterpreted Cruz as Krug. They thought Cruz, some Latino person says Cruz, and somebody wrote down Krug as if it's 125 years ago and it's some tough Jewish name or something. And so it's not Krug, it's Cruz. And she actually walks around calling herself Jessica Cruz. Well,
wow.
Gradually, and I can't believe it took so long.
Wow.
Colleagues figured out that she's a white girl from Kansas City, especially because now all you have to do is look online. There are pictures of her, yearbooks with her family.
That is profound, man.
She just canceled herself completely. And, she had, blog posts where she was discriminated against at conference hotels where they thought she was the help, et cetera. None of that happened. There would not be people like her. There's a little list at this point of Rachel Dolezals and Jessica Krugs. There wouldn't be people like that 50 years ago because being Black really was a problem. Nowadays, things have changed so much that you have these people like on Seinfeld, there's somebody who pretends to be Jewish for the jokes. You have these people who are pretending to be Black for the fake oppression. And that shows that something is really changing, that a certain kind of white person decides to be us. Because if it were really such a pain to walk around as a Black person, nobody would choose that. Those people are new, and that's only over about the past 10 years. Canaries is what I think of them as. We'll see more.
Now you're making me think about Philip Roth's Human Stain. You're making me think about Black No More. Isn't that, who's that?
The ancient one?
Yeah.
Black
intellectual is that?
You don't mean the white guy who went around as black?
No, that's Black Like Me. Isn't that Black Like
Black
Me?
Like Me.
Yeah,
Yes.
and then
yes,
there's a
that's
Black
what
No More, which one of the Black writers of the early mid 20th century, kind of social critic. I can't think of his name. I'm blocking his name right now. But anyway, yeah, there are a lot of these. Okay, so how do and about passing, about like imitation of life, about once you have the category, then you have people who play at this boundary crossing thing. They envision and then they want to be, and if I liken it to transgenderism, somebody's going to get mad at me, so I won't do that. But I'm saying, whereas the biological basis of racial differentiation is much less solid because there are boundaries, obviously, and there's interracial and there's whatever. The biological differences between men and women are rather more profound, a person might say. And then, as I say, there'll be an argument and people will get mad at me. So I'm not going there. We're not talking about that. But we are talking about passing, getting on the other side of the line and envisioning, this imaginary life that you live and, constructing a biography. And there's something so fraudulent about that.
Including that you have intimate relationships and you're lying all the time. Yeah.
Do you not see it with respect to class? Are there not people who try to disguise their relatively prosperous origins and paint themselves, politicians, for example, as if they actually had a tough time? They worked with their hands. They know what it is to be hungry. They, this kind of thing.
You emphasize that sort of thing. Yeah, it's part of identifying with your people and, frankly, with a certain kind of white person who likes to hear you tell that story. Yeah, there is some of that.
Is there not something immoral about appropriating the suffering of people that you haven't actually yourself experienced and yet presenting yourself as if you have experienced it so as to draw to yourself what credit and sympathy would have been coming to them who had actually experienced it? Isn't there something like corrupt about that and exploitative about that should cause us to to look askance?
The reality of it is easy to overlook when you feel like you're making a valuable statement to the world about oppression.
A woman who claims to have been a rape victim and has a narrative about her having been raped who was never raped.
It's different with Black people. Remember, it's different with us because our whole identity is based on being the losers, being the ones who are owed something. So yeah, you mentioned that woman issue. And yes, that's horrible. Our skin crawls at the idea of anybody pretending to have been raped in that way. But when it comes to a Black person pretending to have grown up poor, the idea is not ideal, a little phony, but at least Black people get to hear about Black poverty. And at least you signal to your people that you sympathize with people who grew up poor. I mean, there's that whole routine with a lot of rappers, frankly, to bring up something antique, where there's this competition. How real are you? Did you grow up in the hood? Did you do any gangbanging? Did you sell any drugs? And, there was a lot of phoniness about that. But the idea was that, you're sacrificing truth for something larger about giving a message to the world through your art. And so, yeah, we're not held to as high a standard. I don't like it. That's exactly what's wrong with this sort of thing. You couldn't imagine it with any other group of people, with any other demographic. But for Black people, it's always different. And, to live under that is to feel condescended to, if you pull the camera back a little bit. And I think that's what both of us try to do.
I see a connection between what we're talking about right now and the earlier conversation here about memoir writing and self-honesty and whatnot. Because I think everybody is going to be confronted with the temptation to put a cover story that prettifies what happens in their lives in place of the real story in which they are culpable and their failures are, their own. And I think, for example, the claim that you're a victim of discrimination in an organization where you haven't, worked out and fit in very well and you're Black, and to then seize upon your Blackness as, you're a victim. They never liked me. They never accepted me or whatever, when in fact what went on was you just didn't measure up. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't make the grade. But the temptation is or you're a criminal. You do some heinous act and now you're being punished for it. And, and the account is And it's very easy to wrap yourself in the umbrella of victimhood, mass incarceration, anti-racist, rhetoric and whatever, when in fact it was just your craven, malicious, self-regarding immorality and your heinous act that got you in the box.
Did you see this week that the guy who ran the van into the white crowd in Waukesha, and he sat in court basically
I saw
doing
some of the courtroom stuff, man. I don't even.
Yeah. And, remember, we're supposed to think, well, a white version of him would have done that.
This is Darrell Brooks. Excuse me for interrupting. This is, in case people want to look it up, this is Darrell Brooks, and he was being tried for, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, running a SUV into a Christmas parade, killing 6 people and mangling many others.
Mm-hmm. And he's in the courtroom getting defensive a lot. Now, you might think, would a white guy have done the same thing in the courtroom? Picture a white guy with 3 names from probably the Deep South. Would he have done the same thing? And to be honest, Glenn, I don't read about such things. I think there was a racialized aspect to the way he conducted himself in that room. He may just have some mental issues also, but notice how it comes out.
He was his own attorney. I just want to give the audience the facts. I mean, he was his own attorney in a legal proceeding where he was tried and quick convicted. I think the jury was out for 6 or 8 hours or something like that. Of all these counts, and he represented himself, and it was on court TV or whatever. You could find it online, where he's arguing with the judge and he's making all kinds of representations. He's prancing around the courtroom, spouting all kinds of rhetoric, and to say that he might be mentally ill is a perfectly fine surmise on my part based on what I saw. But he's fueled by some kind of ideology, some kind of black, crazy black aggrievement ideology, and it was a performance. Would you have seen a white guy doing it? You say ultra right wing Nazi type,
right?
I don't see why not. But would we have read about it or heard about it? Probably not.
But I really was surprised at his notion, his taking umbrage at being looked at askance, his taking umbrage at being presumed guilty in any sense, despite the starkness of this act. He didn't like that he wasn't being respected. I hate to say it, but there's a black thingness about that.
I agree with you 100%. Why are we the only people saying this? I mean, maybe they're saying it someplace else. Maybe Fox News is saying it. Maybe Tucker Carlson has said this. I don't know. This dude did a fucking heinously, maliciously vicious thing. Mm-hmm. He's a monster. He drove a vehicle into a parade crowd and he mowed people down intentionally because of their race. Are we the only people to say this? What's wrong here? Now, here's my point. Let me just make this point, John. Because people are not saying it doesn't mean people are not thinking it.
Yes.
A lot of people saw Darrell Brooks' performance in that courtroom and they know what he did. And they know he's black and they know why he did it. And they know who he did it to. They're going to vote. You're playing with fire when you start lying and gaslighting the American people about some of these issues. That dude was a monster, a racially motivated, vicious criminal killer for whom there should be no sympathy whatsoever, except insofar as we might allow that his mental illness drove him to do something horrible. I shouldn't have to be the only person saying this. This is not a political statement. This is not a political statement.
Right-wing media. Yeah.
It's a moral statement. And if you play this game of picking and choosing when you're going to apply morality, you're going to look up and there will be no morality at all. You will have nothing to appeal to. Sorry, I'm sorry, but Jesus.
No, you're right. Remember John Muhammad?
The sniper. I remember, and his son,
John Lee. Was it his son or was it?
I don't know. I don't know. I remember his son, but I could have it wrong.
John Lee Malvo, who is still in jail.
Okay, that's a different case.
Remember with that one that John Muhammad did the same thing. I'm pretty sure he represented himself, and he was in court bridling that he wasn't being given the proper respect, that he was being presumed guilty and being treated as a psychopath. That same thing, where there's this idea that someone like that has, that is being black and having a certain politics maybe, means that we have to see him differently. That's the sort of thing that makes it impossible for me to say we have to get past race. When it's felt so deeply that people like John Muhammad and what's his name?
Darrell Brooks.
Darrell Brooks, because of their skin color, think of themselves as much less culpable for hideous acts that they indisputably performed. It's hard to say, let's all just, think of ourselves as Homo sapiens. There's too much bullshit. We have too much bullshit to cut through. So yeah, these are examples of why I can't go with Kmele despite fully respecting what he's saying. And I know some people might say, and I'd be very interested to know, how often is it that white criminals who are so obviously guilty in the courtroom parade around resentful that they're being treated as reprehensible people? If that's something that happens frequently, I'd like to know, just like I asked, did a white person die like George Floyd? And I was told about Tony Timpa. In this case, because I'm not a criminologist, is that a white thing too? And if it is a white thing too, then I eat crow. I beg your pardon. But I openly admit that my guess is that is more common among Black defendants. And I wish I didn't have to say it, but that is my supposition. I'd be interested to see what we're going to hear.
Yeah, so will I. So will I. John, I think we done our duty here today, unless there's something else that you feel like you really must talk about at this moment.
I think that's it, and I'm hungry, so yeah.
Okay, John McWhorter, Glenn Loury, we're at the Glenn Show, and this has been another episode. Always a pleasure to talk to you, John, and we'll sign off. Glenn.